Saturday, the Times published a piece that once again hit Trump for not being quick to respond to the virus. It was written by 6 journalists, all of whom could have or should have done something sooner, but didn't. But alas, the people who keep saying you should have done something sooner never say that to the guilty party, like the Times itself, who tweeted this on January 9th. There's no evidence that the virus, a coronavirus, is readily spread by humans, oops, and it has not been tied to any deaths, double oops, but health officials in China and internationally are watching it carefully. So not only did the Times dismiss the virus, but also trusted China would handle it, thus endangering all of us. And we're supposed to listen to the Times? Fact is, if Trump had done everything possible, the press would have screamed autocrat, because that's what they were screaming already. They called his travel restrictions, which saved lives, racist. They accused his task force of not being diverse, as if viruses have an HR department. The only crisis the Times could report on is that Trump's president. And about that acting too slow BS, our economy keeps the world afloat. I hope we examined the effects of a shutdown before we pulled the trigger. If you didn't, you're an idiot or a Times editor. So yeah, we could have done it sooner, because everything good could be done sooner. But the people saying it now couldn't be bothered then. I could show you how up into February, the virus didn't really excite the media at all. They were neck deep in the impeachment sandbox. And now they're taking it seriously. Why is that? Do we really need to ask? Impeachment failed, so let's try this. So, Brett, there was some news today. Trump had retweeted a tweet calling for Fauci to be fired. And when that created a little dust up, the White House blasted the idea of firing Fauci as ridiculous. He wouldn't fire Fauci. They get along great, blah, blah, blah. So my question to you, Mr. Bear, if you care to answer it, I love how the media has spent 2 months trying to create a schism between Fauci and Trump. And when it appears that there might be some conflict, they panic, like, oh my God, there's a schism that we've been trying to create for 2 months.
Yep.
There was a question.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing watching this story. You know, like it goes up like a roller coaster and down. Like,
Yes.
Wait a second, Fauci is not at the briefing. Where is he? He's not here. And then down. President Trump says, I trust him. I want to listen to everything he says. This is what's going to happen today, I think. He'll probably be asked the same thing at this briefing today. Now, retweeting something that says fire Fauci at the end, is that advisable?
No.
But the White House quickly came out and said they're not going to fire him. And the president, is pushing back on really being attacked for a long time. And he retweeted something that showed that Fauci at the end of January said that the virus was not going to be a threat to Americans, or was a low threat at best. The bottom line is there's a lot of blame to go around who said what at the beginning. The biggest blame should be China, and what they did and what they didn't do, and what they also didn't tell the world about how contagious this disease was.
I agree. Juan, would you agree, yes, I'm sure you would, that the impeachment process of Bill Clinton took our eye off the ball of Al-Qaeda and radical Islamic terror, which indirectly gave us 9/11, and one could make the same extension from that to this impeachment charade that took the eye off the ball of the coronavirus?
No, I don't think that. I think that the media eye, if that's what you're talking about, Greg, like what was in the headlines, right?
Right.
But I mean, the president is the president. He gets information that nobody else gets. And what we know from the Times reporting, the Washington Post reporting, AP reporting, is that he was warned several times by even Mick Mulvaney, who was then his chief of staff, the National Security Council, Peter Navarro, the economic advisor, Alex Azar, Human Health and Human Services secretary. And what the president did was downplay a lot of these warnings. In fact, when the woman who handles respiratory and immunization said something without his acknowledgement, he basically said these people are alarmists because it's spooking the stock market. So I just think that you have to say the president has some responsibility there. Does the press? I mean, I like what you read about the Times thing, because I think it's a reminder. Lots of people were slow to come to this. It's just that the New York Times is not the president of the United States. It's not the governor of a state. And they have information at a different level. That's why when Dr. Fauci was asked this question yesterday on television, he said, yeah, if we'd acted more quickly, lives could have been saved. I like to look forward and say, let's come together, but I don't think you can excuse the fact that we were so slow to act, and the president was much more invested in what he calls being a cheerleader for our nation than in speaking to the threat. And it was a very visible threat being posed by the coronavirus.
Yeah, Juan brings up Dr. Fauci, Jesse, who was telling people in March they could still go on cruises. So even the experts, and I do think that there was, in the mind of Trump and in the mind of the experts, there was a value to them to keep the panic at bay while they came to grips with this and discussed the big decisions about shutting down the virus. It wasn't a denial phase. It was what they were trying to deal with incoming information in which you would adjust your stance as the information changed. You weren't trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. You were trying to protect the country. Does that make sense?
I would agree with that, and I would also agree with Brett that this all falls on China. Juan and the rest of the media are comparing Donald Trump to perfection. Now, Donald Trump he's not perfect, and he's not close to perfect either. Look at what the media's perfect scenario would have been. They would have said Donald Trump, in the middle of a Senate impeachment trial, should have sent the senators home to their districts to shelter in place. Donald Trump would have told all the voters of the country, don't go to the polls in South Carolina in Super Tuesday, stay home and shelter in place. He would have said in February, before one person died, remember, first death in March 1st, don't go to Easter church services. You're not going to be allowed to go. Could you imagine the reaction of what would have happened if Donald Trump had done that in February? I mean, you could see the headline from the New York Times right now, American despotism, right? And then Donald Trump would have tweeted fake news, and we all would have had a big laugh about it. But the point was, the travel ban came down at the end of January, and the full economic shutdown came down mid-March. That was 6 weeks. 6 weeks went by like that. If you ask me, that was pretty fast. And it wasn't like this whole time in 6 weeks, Joe Biden, Juan, the New York Times, every scientist in the country were screaming at Trump, shut the economy down, man, shut it down. No, they weren't saying anything. The whole month of February, they were talking about Mini Mike and whether he needed a platform to stand on in a debate. That wasn't in the country's head. So to go back and look at this and say, oh, well, woulda, coulda, shoulda, these are all just Johnny-come-latelys.
Mm. You know, Dana, it is pretty funny when you think back about what people were consumed with. And I still think that for some reason the media can only juggle one ball at a time. And it's the ball that harms their adversary, you know?
I was thinking about how all those days that I sat next to my colleagues, Andy McCarthy and Martha McCallum, for literally hours, and Brett was in Washington, D.C. with Chris Wallace, and we sat there, and I could just feel my rear end getting wider as we sat there for hours and hours. And I remember saying, like, it would be great to cover this China story if we ever could get to it, but Greg, you've talked before about how protected America feels because of the oceans on either coast and the fact that we have pretty good neighbors. And so threats like this don't really materialize for a while. The other thing I wanted to say is I've been a part of a lot of look-back stories, Hurricane Katrina, the 9/11 Commission report, enhanced interrogation, the financial crisis. Those stories are always something where hindsight is 20/20. They have that saying for a reason. You can connect all of the dots very easily if you look back and go, oh, well, here, see, you can, obviously you should have done more. And the truth is, when you're in the middle of something, you're dealing with the information you have at the time. Maybe you make the wrong call, but then you try to do better. I think one thing the White House communications team has to think about going forward is that's one story, the look back. The look ahead story and what this country is going to go through economically and possibly health-wise, those stories are going to be even harder to do. So they need to be on top of it. And last thing, I'm sorry, I just wanted to say this about Dr. Fauci. This White House coronavirus task force has mostly been available to any outlet that asks. And they're trying to get the public information out there. And if you're a journalist that is trying to figure out a way to drive a wedge between the president and Fauci so that you could feather your own nest, and then worry that, oh my gosh, the president might fire Dr. Fauci, but that's what you were seeking, you should really rethink that, because Dr. Fauci is being as gracious as he can. President Trump is listening to him and being gracious as well. And my last point is, yes, they did send out the statement saying, oh, the media is being ridiculous. We never would have fired Fauci. It wasn't that quick, though. That was a full 18 hours before they did that. They should be a little faster if that's what they mean.
Yeah, and it is a good point that mistakes, when you make a mistake, everybody makes mistakes in the fog of war. It's correcting them quickly that makes you a successful, effective person. I read that somewhere in a self-help book.